I confronted my coworker about taking credit for my work. HR already knew. The conference room went silent when I threw the printed emails on the table. Not the polite, waiting for someone to speak kind of silent. The kind where everyone stops breathing. Diana Kovac, our HR director, didn't even glance at the papers. She just looked at me with this expression I couldn't quite read. Somewhere between pity and something that made my stomach drop. That's when I knew. She already knew. The realization hit me like cold water. This wasn't going to be the triumphant moment I'd imagined. This was something else entirely. I'd been at Meridian Tech Solutions for 4 years, working as a senior software architect in their cloud infrastructure division. It wasn't a sexy job title that impressed people at parties, but I was good at it. Really good. I'd designed 3 major system overhauls that saved the company millions in server costs and reduced downtime by 87%. I had the metrics memorized because I'd presented them so many times, or at least I thought I had. The office was one of those modern open-plan nightmares with standing desks and collaboration zones, but I'd carved out my corner near the windows and made it work. I came in at 7, left at 6, and spent most weekends reading white papers about distributed systems architecture. My girlfriend Amy used to joke that I was married to my work. She stopped joking about it around month 3 of us dating. She just accepted it. Nathan Reeves sat 2 desks away from me. He'd joined the team about 18 months ago, transferring in from our Austin office with a reputation for being a big picture guy. Whatever that meant. He was 42, always wore expensive suits that seemed out of place in our casual tech environment, and had this way of talking that made everything sound more important than it was. I liked him at first. He asked good questions during my presentations, took me to lunch twice in his first week, and seemed genuinely interested in understanding our infrastructure. He called me the technical genius, and himself the translator who helps the business side understand what you brilliant engineers are doing. I should have seen it then. That framing. Him as the bridge, me as the basement dweller who couldn't communicate. But I didn't. I just thought he was being friendly and acknowledging his limitations. The first time it happened, I barely noticed. We'd been in a meeting with the VP of operations, and I'd explained a new load balancing solution I'd designed. Nathan jumped in halfway through, rephrasing what I'd said with more business jargon. So what David is saying, he'd announced, is that we're implementing a strategic redundancy protocol that will optimize our operational efficiency metrics by creating fail-safes in our cloud architecture. This directly impacts our bottom line by reducing customer-facing downtime incidents, which, as we know, cost us roughly $15,000 per hour in lost revenue and customer confidence. I'd sat there nodding because, well, that was what I was saying. He was just translating it. That's what translators do, right? The VP had nodded enthusiastically, made some notes, and thanked Nathan for breaking it down so clearly. I'd felt a tiny flicker of something in my chest, annoyance, confusion, but I'd pushed it away. Team player. That's what I told myself. We're all working toward the same goal. It happened again 3 weeks later, then again. Then it became a pattern I couldn't ignore anymore. Nathan would listen to my technical explanations in our team meetings, then somehow end up in one-on-one meetings with executives where he'd present his ideas for system improvements. I started noticing it because other senior engineers would mention things to me in the break room. Hey, heard Nathan's working on that database optimization project. Wow, that's really cool. Except it wasn't Nathan's project. It was mine. I've been working on it for 6 months. When I'd mention this, people would look confused. Oh, they'd say. I just assumed since he's been talking about it in all the leadership meetings. I'd laugh it off, say something about communication wires getting crossed. But that feeling in my chest was growing. It wasn't just annoyance anymore. It was something darker and more unsettling. I started keeping records, not because I was suspicious exactly, or maybe I was, but I couldn't admit it yet. I told myself I was just being organized. I created a private folder on my laptop labeled Project Documentation, where I saved every email I sent with technical proposals, every Slack message where I outlined solutions, every meeting note where I'd presented ideas. I timestamped everything. Looking back, some part of me must have known. Some instinct was screaming that I needed proof of my own work, my own thoughts, my own contributions. But consciously, I was still telling myself this was just good practice. Document everything. That's what they teach you in engineering. Create a paper trail. I just didn't realize yet that I was creating evidence for a case I hadn't filed yet. The breaking point came on a cold morning in November. I arrived at 7:15 like always, my coffee from the shop downstairs still steaming. The office was mostly empty, except for the early birds like me and the people on East Coast time. I settled at my desk, opened my laptop, and saw the calendar notification. All hands meeting, 9 a.m., auditorium. These were quarterly events where leadership shared company updates and major announcements. I usually zoned out during the business side stuff and perked up when they mentioned tech initiatives. This time was different. This time, I watched Nathan walk onto that stage with our CEO, a woman named Rebecca Huang, who'd built Meridian from a tiny startup to a company with over 800 employees. I watched Nathan smile that practice smile of his, and then I watched him accept an award, or an actual crystal award on a wooden base for Outstanding Innovation in Cloud Infrastructure Design. The citation specifically mentioned the revolutionary load balancing protocol and database optimization framework that has saved Meridian over $2.3 million annually. I felt like I was watching myself from outside my body. My hands went numb. The applause around me sounded distant and tinny, like I was underwater. That was my work. Every single word of that citation described systems I had designed, code I had written, problems I had solved during late nights and weekends when Nathan was probably at home watching television or whatever he did with his free time. I'd sent him the technical specifications. I'd explained the architecture. He'd said he wanted to understand it better so he could help communicate the value to stakeholders. I'd been so stupid, so unbelievably, catastrophically stupid. The woman next to me nudged my arm and said, "Aren't you on Nathan's team? You must be so proud." I managed to nod. I think I even smiled. But inside, something had cracked wide open. I spent the rest of that day in a fog. I went through the motions, attended meetings, answered emails, helped a junior developer debug a networking issue. But my brain was somewhere else entirely. It was replaying every interaction with Nathan. Every time he'd asked to pick my brain about a technical problem, every time he'd invited himself to my meetings with other teams, just to observe and learn. He hadn't been learning. He'd been stealing. Not stealing like making copies of my code or taking credit on GitHub commits, while that would have been obvious, traceable. No, he'd been stealing in a much more insidious way. He'd been taking my ideas, my solutions, my architectural frameworks, and presenting them as his own insights to people who didn't have the technical knowledge to question it. And because he was older, because he wore those expensive suits, because he had that confident corporate voice, they believed him. They believed he was the innovator. They believed I was just the guy implementing his brilliant ideas. That evening, I didn't go home. I stayed at my desk while the office emptied out, while the cleaning crew came through, while the security guard made his rounds. I opened that private folder and started organizing everything chronologically. Emails I'd sent to Nathan explaining technical concepts, dated 3 months before he'd presented those same concepts to executives. Slack messages where I'd outlined solutions to problems, time-stamped weeks before Nathan had taken credit for solving them. Meeting notes from sessions where I'd walked him through my thinking. I had it all. 4 years of work, distilled into a timeline of innovation that proved beyond any doubt that Nathan Reeves was a fraud. The question was, what was I supposed to do with this information? Confront him directly? Go to his manager? Go to HR? I sat there until almost midnight, staring at my screen, before I finally shut down my laptop and drove home in silence. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed next to Amy, listening to her breathe, staring at the ceiling and thinking about my options. Every scenario I played out felt wrong somehow. If I confronted Nathan directly, he'd deny it. He'd say I was misunderstanding our collaborative relationship, that we were a team, that of course we both contributed to these projects. If I went to his manager, I'd look petty and jealous. Nobody likes a tattletale, especially in corporate culture where team player is code for don't make waves. But if I did nothing, if I let this continue, I'd be complicit in my own erasure. I thought about that award on Nathan's desk. I thought about the $2.3 million of value I'd created. I thought about the fact that he probably got a significant bonus for that innovation. I thought about my career trajectory, about promotions I'd applied for and didn't get, about opportunities that went to people who were more visible, more vocal, more like Nathan. The anger was building now, hot and solid in my chest. I'd been played, I'd been used, and I was done being quiet about it. The next morning, I requested a meeting with Diana Kovac in HR. I didn't go through the normal channels or schedule it through her assistant. I walked straight to her office at 8 a.m. and asked if she had 15 minutes. She looked surprised, but invited me in, closing the door behind me. Her office was decorated with motivational posters about teamwork and integrity. I remember noticing that detail because the irony would hit me later. I sat across from her desk, pulled out my laptop, and told her everything. I showed her the timeline. I showed her the emails, the messages, the documentation. I explained that Nathan had been systematically taking credit for my work and that it had culminated in him receiving an award for innovations I had designed. I was calm. I was professional. I stuck to facts and timestamps and evidence. Diana listened with that careful, neutral expression, HR people perfect. She took notes. She asked clarifying questions. And when I finished, she said something that made my blood run cold. "David, I appreciate you bringing this to my attention. This is concerning, and we'll absolutely look into it. Can I ask, have you discussed these concerns with Nathan directly?" That question felt like a trap. Like she was testing whether I'd followed some unwritten protocol, but it also felt like deflection, like she was already trying to find a way to make this my problem instead of Nathan's. I said no. I hadn't confronted him because I wanted to handle this through proper channels. She nodded slowly and said, "I understand. Let me review what you've shown me and discuss with leadership. We take these matters very seriously." The words were right, but something about her tone was wrong. She wasn't shocked. She wasn't outraged on my behalf. She was careful. Too careful. I left her office feeling more unsettled than when I'd entered. The meeting had lasted 45 minutes, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Diana hadn't seemed surprised by any of it. She'd seemed prepared. Like she'd been expecting this conversation eventually. I tried to focus on work, but my concentration was shot. I kept watching Nathan from across the office, wondering if HR had already talked to him, wondering what he'd say when confronted with evidence. He looked completely normal, typing on his laptop, taking phone calls, laughing at something on his screen. No signs of stress or guilt. Around 2 p.m., my phone buzzed with a calendar invite. Meeting with Diana Kovac and legal, tomorrow at 10 a.m. Legal. They were bringing legal into this. I told myself that was good, that it meant they were taking it seriously. But there was a knot in my stomach that wouldn't go away. I'd expected maybe a follow-up with just HR or a mediation session with Nathan. Legal involvement felt heavy. It felt serious in a way that I wasn't sure was good or bad for me. That night, I did something I'm not particularly proud of. I created a burner email account and forwarded copies of all my evidence to myself. Every email, every message, every document. I encrypted the files and saved them to 3 separate cloud storage accounts. I even printed physical copies and stored them at Amy's apartment. When she asked what I was doing, I told her I was just being cautious. She looked at me with concern and said, "David, you're scaring me a little. What's really going on?" So I explained everything: the credit theft, the award, the HR meeting, the legal involvement. She listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she said something that struck me. "You know what's weird? You always work so hard, but never get the recognition. I always thought it was because you were quiet, but maybe—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. Maybe it wasn't because I was quiet. Maybe it was because someone else was loud. The legal meeting was not what I expected. I walked into the conference room at 10 a.m., sharp, to find Diana Kovac and a man I'd never met before. He introduced himself as Lawrence Brennan, Senior Corporate Counsel for Meridian Tech Solutions. He had gray hair, an expensive watch, and the kind of face that revealed nothing. He asked me to walk through my concerns again, which I did, referencing the documentation I'd provided to Diana. He listened without taking notes, which struck me as odd, like he already had all the information he needed. When I finished, there was a long pause. Then Lawrence said, "David, I want to be very clear about something. We've reviewed your claims, and we've also reviewed Nathan's employment file and his documented contributions to the company. What we're seeing is a misunderstanding of collaborative work processes and potentially some miscommunication about attribution. That's not uncommon in team environments." I felt something sink inside me. This wasn't an investigation. This was damage control. I started to argue, to point out specific examples where Nathan had presented my exact work as his own. But Lawrence held up a hand. "Let me finish. We recognize that you feel your contributions haven't been adequately recognized, and that's something we can address through your normal performance review process. However, making formal accusations against a colleague without clear evidence of intentional misconduct is serious. It can be construed as creating a hostile work environment. We want to resolve this amicably." The words "hostile work environment" hung in the air like a threat. I looked at Diana. She avoided eye contact. That's when I understood. They weren't protecting me. They were protecting Nathan, or protecting the company, or maybe protecting the $2.3 million story they'd told investors and shareholders about their innovative leadership. I was the problem in this scenario. I was the troublemaker who was rocking the boat. I asked the question directly. "Are you saying you don't believe me, even with the documentation?" Lawrence's expression didn't change. "I'm saying that in collaborative environments, attribution can be complex. Ideas build on other ideas. Nathan has documented his strategic contributions to these projects through meeting notes and executive summaries. Your technical implementations are valued, but strategy and vision are also forms of contribution. It was corporate doublespeak, but the message was clear. Nathan's version of events was being accepted as truth. His strategic contributions, which consisted of regurgitating my ideas in business language, were being treated as equal to or more valuable than the actual technical work. I felt something inside me shift. Not anger anymore, something colder, calculating. I said I understood and asked what the next steps were. Diana actually looked relieved that I wasn't arguing. She said they'd like me to focus on my work, maintain professional relationships with all team members, and consider this matter closed. I nodded. I agreed. I shook Lawrence's hand and walked out of that conference room with perfect composure. And then I went to my desk and started planning. I wasn't going to win by playing by their rules. That much was obvious. The company had made its choice, and that choice wasn't me. But I had something they didn't know about. I had proof. Real, time-stamped, incontrovertible proof. And I had copies of everything stored safely away where corporate legal couldn't disappear them. I spent the next week acting completely normal. I attended meetings, collaborated with Nathan like nothing had happened, smiled at Diana in the hallways. I was pleasant and professional and everything they wanted me to be, and while I did that, I was also doing research. I learned about whistleblower protections, I learned about constructive dismissal, I learned about intellectual property attribution in employment contracts. I found out that our employee handbook had an entire section on innovation credit and proper documentation of contributions. I read that section about 15 times, taking detailed notes. They'd written the rules. I was just going to make them follow them. I also started reaching out to people, carefully, casually. I'd grab coffee with engineers from other teams and ask them about their experiences with credit and recognition. I learned I wasn't alone. 3 other people mentioned similar situations, not with Nathan specifically, but with other senior managers who had a tendency to present team achievements as personal wins. One woman, Priya Malhotra, who worked in our data analytics division, told me about a project she'd led that was later described in a company press release as being spearheaded by her director, who'd attended maybe 2 meetings total. The pattern was clear. This wasn't just about Nathan. This was about a company culture that rewarded presentation over production, storytelling over substance. The more I learned, the angrier I got. But I channeled that anger into something productive. I was building a case, not just against Nathan, but against a systemic problem. Then I got a call from my father. We'd been talking about my career recently, and I'd mentioned some frustrations without going into detail. He's a retired patent attorney, spent 40 years protecting inventors' intellectual property rights. When I told him what was happening, I asked the whole story. Everything. There was a long silence on the phone. Then he said something I didn't expect. "David, do you have documentation proving you created these systems before Nathan presented them?" I said yes. He said, "Good. Because what you're describing isn't just unethical. Depending on your employment contract and how company IP is structured, it might be fraud. If Nathan received compensation bonuses, promotions, stock options, based on claiming credit for your patentable work, that's potentially criminal. Let me make some calls." I started to protest that I didn't want to turn this into a legal nightmare, but he cut me off. "Son, they've already made it a legal nightmare. They just haven't told you yet." He connected me with an employment attorney named Julian Foster, a partner at a firm that specialized in workplace rights and intellectual property disputes. I met Julian in his office on a Saturday morning, bringing every piece of documentation I had. He was younger than I expected, maybe mid-30s, with an intensity that reminded me of the way I approached technical problems. Methodical, thorough, unwilling to accept surface explanations. He spent 3 hours reviewing my evidence, asking questions, taking notes. Finally, he looked up and said, "This is one of the cleanest cases of work misappropriation I've seen. You've documented everything perfectly. But I need to be honest with you about what happens next. If we pursue this, it's going to get ugly. Companies don't like being exposed for this kind of thing. They'll try to discredit you, question your motives, maybe even your mental state. They'll argue that collaborative work makes attribution complicated. They'll drag this out and make it expensive and exhausting. Are you prepared for that?" I thought about that Crystal Award on Nathan's desk. I thought about the meeting with Lawrence Brennan where they'd essentially called me a troublemaker for pointing out theft. I thought about 4 years of my best work, my most innovative thinking, my problem-solving genius being attributed to a man in an expensive suit who couldn't write a line of code to save his life. I thought about every other engineer at Meridian who was probably going through the same thing, staying quiet because fighting the system seemed impossible. I looked at Julian and said, "Yes, I'm prepared." He nodded. "Good. Then let's make them very uncomfortable." We started by filing a formal complaint with the California Labor Commissioner's office, documenting wage theft, specifically the bonuses and compensation Nathan had received for my work. Julian explained that while ideas can't be owned, the economic value of those ideas could be quantified, and if Nathan had been compensated for claiming them, that was tangible theft. But the real strategy was more comprehensive. Julian advised that we needed to create a public record that couldn't be buried in corporate legal maneuvering. So we also filed a complaint with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, framing this as a form of discrimination. Not protected class discrimination, but a pattern of crediting senior employees over junior engineers regardless of actual contribution, which created a hostile work environment for anyone trying to advance on merit. It was a bit of a stretch legally, but it got the case into federal records. And then and this was the piece that would change everything. Julian suggested we reach out to tech media, places like TechCrunch, Wired, Ars Technica, places that loved stories about corporate malfeasance in Silicon Valley. We crafted a detailed but anonymized pitch, a story about systematic credit theft at a mid-sized tech company, backed by ironclad documentation. 3 outlets expressed immediate interest. I want to say I felt victorious or powerful, but mostly I felt terrified. This was the nuclear option. Once we went public, there was no walking it back. I'd be burning bridges not just at Meridian, but potentially throughout the industry. People don't like whistleblowers. They don't like troublemakers. But I kept coming back to the same thought. If I stayed silent, I was allowing them to steal not just my past work, but my future. Every promotion I didn't get, every opportunity that went to someone more visible, every year I stayed in the same position while charlatans climbed the ladder on work they didn't do, that was on me if I didn't fight now. So I authorized Julian to move forward. We sent the media pitch, we filed the complaints, and then we waited. The waiting was the worst part. Going to work every day knowing that somewhere a clock was ticking on a bomb nobody else knew existed. The bomb went off on a Wednesday morning. TechCrunch published first, under the headline, "Engineering Erasure, How tech companies enable senior leaders to steal junior employees' innovations. It didn't name Meridian in the initial story, but it had enough details that anyone in the industry could figure it out. The article included excerpts from my documentation, the smoking gun emails and messages showing Nathan learning technical concepts from me and then presenting them as his own insights. The reporter, a woman named Keisha Grant, who'd been investigating workplace culture in tech for years, had done additional interviews with other Meridian employees, anonymously, who confirmed similar patterns. The story went viral within hours. By lunch, it had 40,000 shares on social media. By end of day, it was trending on Twitter. The tech community was having a field day with it. Reddit threads dissected every detail. Industry forums debated the ethics of collaborative attribution, and Meridian's PR team was in full crisis mode. I watched it all unfold from my desk, my heart pounding so hard I thought people around me could hear it. Nathan had called in sick that morning. I learned later that HR had advised him to work from home until things settled down. Diana Kovac walked past my desk 3 times, her face pale and drawn. She didn't look at me. Around 2 p.m., I got an email from Rebecca Huang's assistant. The CEO wanted to see me immediately. I grabbed my laptop and walked to the executive floor, my legs feeling shaky. This was it. Either they were going to fire me for going public, or they were going to try to make this go away. Rebecca's office was all glass walls and minimalist furniture. She sat behind her desk, looking more tired than angry. Lawrence Brennan was there too, standing by the window. Rebecca gestured for me to sit. She said, "David, we need to talk about the TechCrunch article." I decided to save her the trouble of dancing around it. "I was the source," I said. "Everything in that article is true and documented. I tried to resolve this internally. You chose to protect Nathan instead." Rebecca closed her eyes briefly, like she was in pain. "David, do you understand what you've done? We're looking at a major PR crisis. Our investors are calling. Clients are questioning our integrity. All because you couldn't handle not getting credit for some projects." Some projects. 4 years of innovation reduced to some projects. I felt that cold anger flood back. "No," I said carefully. "All because your company systematically allows senior employees to steal junior employees' work, and when someone finally has the documentation to prove it, you call them a troublemaker instead of addressing the problem." Lawrence cleared his throat. "Mr. Chanao." I cut him off. "It's David, and you should probably know that I've also filed complaints with the Labor Commissioner and the EEOC, and I've retained counsel, and I have copies of every piece of evidence stored in multiple locations, so whatever you're about to offer me, whether it's money or a promotion or a non-disparagement agreement, you should know that I'm not interested in making this quiet." The room went very still. Rebecca and Lawrence exchanged a look that I couldn't quite read. Then Rebecca said something that shocked me. "What do you want? Not what would it take to make this go away. Not how can we resolve this amicably. Just, what do you want?" I hadn't expected that question. I'd expected threats, legal maneuvering, maybe termination, not negotiation. I thought about it for a moment. Then I said, "I want a formal investigation into Nathan's claims of innovation. I want an independent audit of who actually created what. I want my work properly attributed. I want him held accountable if the audit proves he committed fraud. And I want policy changes that prevent this from happening to anyone else here." Rebecca nodded slowly. "That's reasonable. What about the media coverage? Will you make a statement?" I shook my head. "That depends on what your investigation finds. If you actually fix this, I'll say so. If you don't, I'll keep talking." The next week was chaos. Meridian hired an outside firm to conduct a forensic review of Nathan's projects and contributions. They interviewed dozens of employees, reviewed thousands of emails and messages, examined GitHub commits, and project documentation. Nathan was placed on administrative leave, which meant he was sitting at home collecting a paycheck while investigators went through 4 years of his professional life. I had to participate in hours of interviews, walking investigators through technical architectures and explaining how various systems had been developed. It was exhausting and invasive, but it was also validating. Every session confirmed what I'd been saying all along. The work was mine. The innovation was mine. Nathan had contributed nothing but translation and presentation, and even that had been based on my explanations. The lead investigator was a woman named Dr. Rashida Adekunle, a forensic analyst who specialized in intellectual property disputes. She had a PhD in computer science and 20 years of experience, and she did not mess around. She told me during one break, "In my career, I've seen a lot of credit theft. This case is particularly egregious because of how systematic it was. Your documentation is extraordinary. Most people don't think to protect themselves this way." I told her I'd gotten lucky, that I'd been keeping records almost by instinct. She gave me a sharp look and said, "That wasn't luck. That was you, knowing something was wrong and preparing to prove it." The final report came out 3 weeks later, 147 pages of detailed analysis. The conclusions were devastating for Nathan. Of the 12 major projects he'd claimed credit for, he had contributed meaningful technical work to exactly 0. He had attended meetings, asked questions, and drafted executive summaries, but all of the actual innovation. The system architecture, the problem-solving, the implementation had been done by other people, primarily me. The report found that Nathan had received approximately $320,000 in bonuses and stock grants based on these false claims. It recommended immediate termination, clawback of compensation, and referral to law enforcement for potential fraud charges. It also found that Herau, specifically Diana Kovachau, had been aware of complaints about Nathan's behavior from at least 2 other engineers and had failed to investigate properly. The report recommended her termination as well. Rebecca Huang released a statement taking full responsibility for the failures in company culture and promising sweeping changes. Nathan was fired. Diana was fired. The company implemented new policies requiring detailed attribution on all projects and created an anonymous reporting system for credit disputes. But here's the thing. Nobody tells you about vindication. It doesn't feel as good as you think it will. Nathan's termination made headlines. Tech Twitter celebrated my win. Articles got written about me as some kind of hero standing up to corporate bullshit. But I had to keep working at Meridian because I couldn't afford to quit, and now everyone knew me as that guy who took down Nathan Reeves. Some people treated me like a celebrity. Others avoided me like I was dangerous. Like if they collaborated with me, I might accuse them of theft too. My relationship with Amy deteriorated and eventually ended. She said she couldn't compete with my crusade for my attention. I got promoted to principal architect and received back pay for the bonuses I should have earned, which was great on paper but felt hollow in practice. The work that had once energized me now felt tainted by everything that had happened. I'd won the battle, but I wasn't sure I'd won anything else. The criminal case against Nathan took almost a year to develop. The district attorney's office, after reviewing the evidence and consulting with federal prosecutors, charged him with wire fraud and theft of intellectual property. The wire fraud charge stuck because he'd sent emails to executives claiming credit for work he hadn't done, knowing those claims would result in compensation. It was a novel application of the law, and it set a precedent. Julian told me this could change how companies handle credit attribution in the future, that other employees could point to this case when fighting similar battles. Nathan's attorney tried to argue that he'd simply been doing his job, that strategy was a form of contribution, that collaborative environments made attribution inherently unclear. But the forensic evidence was too strong. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before finding him guilty on 3 counts. He was sentenced to 18 months in federal prison and ordered to pay full restitution, not just to me, but to Meridian for the value they'd lost in the PR crisis and investigation costs. That was almost $2 million. His career in tech was over. His reputation was destroyed. Everything he'd built on stolen work collapsed. I testified at his sentencing hearing. The judge asked if I wanted to make a statement, and I stood up in that courtroom and told the truth. I said Nathan had stolen more than work or money or credit. He'd stolen time. Years of my life when I'd believed that hard work and talent were enough, that if I was good at what I did, success would follow naturally. He'd stolen my faith in systems that were supposed to protect merit over politics. He'd stolen my ability to trust collaborative relationships, because now I second-guessed every interaction, wondering if people valued my ideas or just wanted to mine them for their own advancement. I said I didn't feel victorious or satisfied. I felt tired. I felt like I'd had to burn down my career to get basic recognition for my work. And I said that while I didn't regret going public, I wished it hadn't been necessary. I wished the company had listened the first time. I wished our culture valued creation over presentation. Nathan stared straight ahead while I spoke. He never apologized, never even acknowledged what he'd done. The judge, a 60-year-old woman named Eleanor Frost who'd spent 20 years on the bench, looked at Nathan and said something I'll never forget. Mr. Reeves, you stole credit from people whose boots you weren't qualified to lick. You diminished their accomplishments and inflated your own. And you did it with such confidence that an entire company believed you. That kind of theft is particularly insidious because it's invisible until someone is brave enough to document it. 18 months is the minimum. I wish I could give you more. It's been 2 years now since the TechCrunch article went viral. I left Meridian about 6 months after Nathan's conviction. The place had too many ghosts for me. I'm working at a smaller company now, one with stronger attribution policies and a culture that actually values technical contribution. I make more money. I get credit for my work. I even got a patent last year for a distributed caching system I designed. On paper, everything worked out fine, but I carry the experience with me in ways I didn't expect. I'm suspicious of senior managers who seem too interested in my projects. I document everything obsessively, not because I think someone will steal from me again, but because I can't shake the habit. I have trust issues with HR departments and corporate leadership in general. Amy and I eventually reconciled and are figuring things out, but she says I'm different now. More guarded, more cynical. Maybe she's right. You don't go through something like that and come out unchanged. But I also think I'm more clear-eyed about how the world works, more willing to fight for what's mine. More aware that sometimes you have to be your own advocate because nobody else will do it for you. The broader impact has been interesting. Several other companies have revised their attribution policies after seeing what happened at Meridian. There have been 3 other high-profile cases of credit theft in tech that directly referenced my situation. Employment lawyers now have case law they can point to when representing engineers in similar disputes. It's not a revolution, but it's movement. And I've heard from dozens of people, from our mostly younger engineers, mostly women and people of color, who've told me that seeing my case gave them courage to document their own work, to speak up when credit was stolen, to not stay silent when the system failed them. That matters. It doesn't erase what I went through, but it gives it meaning beyond my personal vindication. Change happens slowly in corporate America, but it happens when someone draws a line and says, "Not this time, not to me, not anymore." As for Nathan, he served 14 months of his sentence before being released. I heard through the tech industry grapevine that he's working in retail management now, nowhere near technology. He lost his house, his wife divorced him, and he's paying off that $2 million judgment in installments that will probably continue for decades. Sometimes I wonder if he thinks about those 4 years when he rode high on my innovations, when he accepted that Crystal Award, when he believed he'd gotten away with it. Sometimes I wonder if he understands what he did wrong, or if he still thinks he was just playing the game the way everyone else does. I'll probably never know. We've never spoken since his sentencing. I have no desire to confront him or seek closure or whatever people think victims need. I got what I came for: acknowledgement, restitution, justice. The rest is just footnotes. People ask me sometimes if it was worth it. The stress, the public exposure, the career disruption, the personal cost. I always tell them the same thing. I didn't have a choice. Well, I did have a choice, technically. I could have stayed quiet, could have accepted the theft, could have told myself that's just how corporate America works and adapted to it. But that would have killed something essential in me: my sense of fairness, my belief that work should matter more than performance, my faith that documentation and evidence and truth actually count for something. So yes, it was worth it. Not because I got a happy ending, I didn't, not really, but because I refused to let them make me invisible. Because I fought back and won, even though the system was designed to protect people like Nathan. Because I proved that someone like me, someone who just wanted to do good work and have it recognized, could take on a corporation and a fraud and a broken culture and come out the other side still standing. That's worth something. Maybe that's worth everything. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.